Pleasure to meet you. And thanks for having me. I'm actually really very much looking forward to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I am too, man. It's great to meet you. I'm so glad that we ran into each other. And, my main vocation background is music. So it's so good on this platform to run into musicians because that's kind of my native language, so to
Yeah.
speak. So let's get into it. Before we do, the one thing about living through the last 3 years is that from my perspective, it really did ravage the music community. I mean, it was like of all the people out
Yeah.
there that really just could not do anything for the longest time, it was musicians. So I'm going to begin with, how did you survive that time period now that the world is waking up? And how has it changed the way that you do things now?
Yeah. That is such a great question, and with a lot of subpoints that I'll try my best to unpack. A little context here for your listeners, which obviously I might be a little bit of an outlier in terms of the genre that I run in, but what a lot of people probably don't realize. I play in like a punk alternative band I have for the last 2 decades called the Wonder Years, and but I had a really incredible upbringing in the jazz world as well. I played trombone all throughout junior high, high school, and really had an interesting formative appreciation for that as well. And I'm sure in some ways maybe we can get into how that colored my entry creatively with the career and the band that I've had. But that brought us to a point where we were about 15, 16 years into a really incredibly successful career as a band, and then hit that pandemic wall, right? Where touring, especially for rock bands right now, obviously a lot of things have shifted into the digital sphere, but from a purely career sustaining standpoint, we are a band that is in a genre that decidedly relies on touring and having a steady touring calendar, both domestically and internationally. So that was the first thing when you realize that's getting wiped off the books indefinitely. And we were actually on a tour. We came home and missed the last week of the tour that we were on when everything shut down. It was a really, really interesting, weird, wild world out there where we kept playing cities, like we'd play LA, and then 2 days later they would, put a cap on any gatherings over like 500 or 600. Be like, wow, if we were 2 days later, the show wouldn't have happened. Same thing happens in San Francisco. We get to Denver, the NBA announces they're shutting down, and America's beloved Tom Hanks has COVID. And I said, this tour is not getting finished. And sure enough, that's kind of how it went. But so you go home, just like everybody else, you're sitting, waiting, wondering what's going to happen. People are throwing out a lot of theories. And we too, we're kind of in a holding pattern, but luckily, with our upbringing as kind of a very like DIY energized band, we've learned to kind of steer into the problem solving and say, okay, that didn't go the way we would have liked or worked. What are our options and what's the next step? And honestly, it didn't take too long. Obviously, everybody was worried, about getting family and safety and things like that. But we pivoted pretty quick and said, what can we do? What are our options in terms of streaming? We know that we're very lucky that we have an incredibly supportive and devout fan base. What can we give them? What can we do right now? And when will it be safe? And that became kind of the model for eventually later that summer. We did, rented out a studio, did a live stream where there was no audience, but and started testing the waters with that and trying to find a way to do things not just to kind of like pass the time, but to let everybody else out there that was living through the same reality know it's like, hey, this is very weird. This is strange new ground with us, for us as well, as people and as a band and our industry, and just trying to do what we could to bridge that gap and keep that connection there and work as a support system, even if it's just people's experience with music. It's a lifeline a lot of times,
Yeah.
and that's not just in any specific given genre. It's like I had an Uber driver yesterday who had maybe the most eclectically algorithm destroying playlist that I've ever heard. It was going from like Phil Collins to like a death metal song to an Offspring like deep cut to like a Bonnie Raitt track, and I was like, are you okay? I was like, I love all this too, but like, you know that the internet and all these streaming platforms have no idea what to make of of a person like you. But
Yeah.
it's really incredible because it's, you know, it shows exactly that it doesn't, you know, it doesn't matter what genre you're in, be it jazz, be it rock, be it heavily you know, computer based sound music. It does that, and we saw that here and saw how much of a lifeline it was. And I think in a weird way, this is all a roundabout way of saying that I think it only further um, deepened the connection that we had, and you know, appreciation that we had for our fans that got us through that. You know, and we did some interesting, you know, like merchandise offers, streaming offers, exclusive things that we could. And they were there to support us, and you know, it really was a testament to that trust that we had built with them, with our audience across the last 2 decades. So it was really incredible. And to answer your question in terms of how did that potentially change, you know, on the other end, right? Touring itself has changed immensely. A lot of independently owned venues and smaller and mid-cap venues did not weather the storm, could not survive. So in terms of a simple supply and demand kind of arc, there are less venues. There are just as many, if not more, artists now trying to go play in them, especially with a lot of people that, you know, the uptick of, instead of twiddling my thumbs, maybe I'll finally write my album with all of this free time, you know, that I've been putting off. So there was an influx of just actual music afterwards. So there's that, as well as a lot of other companies that support the touring industry and music industry at large, like bus companies. All those expenses went up, and the demand for it. I mean, we're booking, having to book buses like almost a year in advance now, and even
Wow.
that we almost can't get them. You know, so it's changed that. It's changed. It's stretched out. We have to now plan. We were already planning about, you know, anywhere from 8 months to a year out, because as musicians, you plan in cycles. You plan the whole run up to an album, you know, the release, the marketing campaign before, during, after, and then a whole, you know, 1.5 to 2 year touring cycle internationally, making it to different areas. And that changes now too. I think bands are a little bit more risk averse, maybe, unfortunately, where it's like, hey, we might go, you know, try and play this market that we've never played, and you know, at the risk of maybe losing a little bit of money, but that's okay for the experience and to try and grow. And now I think decisions like that seem a little bit more risky, because you don't know what's around the corner, and you don't want to have just come off a tour where you lost money and now all of a sudden you can't go back on tour to actually recoup it for another 2 3 years. So I've seen a little bit of that shift, you know, but I will say overall, having gotten back out and now done 2 full US tours, with the challenges of trying to keep audiences safe, venue staff safe, ourselves, other bands that we bring on our tours, people are glad that it is back, you
Yeah.
know, and people have come back. There was a little trepidation for sure, and the industry felt this, promoters felt it. You know, before, you would typically, if a show sold out, right, you might have anywhere from a, you know, like a 7 to 10%, you know, no show. People had to work, people, you know, couldn't make it, life happens, right? During the pandemic, you were seeing like 20 to 30%, you know, drop offs on the drop count, which is, you know, how many people actually show up versus how many people bought tickets. That number, I think, has come back around and stabilized closer to where it was, thankfully. But it means a lot, and I think that is, you know, the entertainment industry at large is such a value and support that pays dividends, that gets so many other people and non-musicians through what they do. And you know, it's just really nice to be back, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you talked about jazz trombone in the beginnings. Talk to me about where you were born and raised, and you maybe some early influences on you.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to. So I was born and raised in outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I'm a Northeast guy. If anybody couldn't already start to pick up on that from the accent, I'm told I have.
Yeah.
I'm actually coming to you from Atlanta now. I moved down there about close to 2 years ago now. And but I will always be a Philly musician and a Philly guy through and through. And as far as early influences, so my father was a musician and did play in a classic rock band back in the 70s. So I got bit by that bug, as many people do. But he wasn't as active, playing, or still, still keeping up with it. But I would hear some of the stories and the lore, and then the crates of pretty beat up vinyl that were left around. So that was my first, deep dive into a lot of that, like, classic rock, folk stuff from that era, right? Everything from, Zeppelin LPs that were pretty much more noise floor than rock, but still trying to get through it and being really interested by it. And he played bass in that band, and so he still had a few amps and a few basses lying around in the attic that were more or less collecting dust. It's just following him along for nostalgia, but I'd pick that up, marvel at how heavy like a 1969 jazz bass was, and just love it and noodle around. And so that came time when, and luckily this was that the public school system outside of Philadelphia. I was very lucky. Their music and arts program hadn't yet been cut. So when you're in, what is it? I think like third grade, fourth grade, you have someone from the junior high, the music teacher, come around with like a couple of each instruments, let you blow through a trumpet, let you try to like fiddle around with the violin and all that stuff, see if anything catches your interest, and then pitch the parents to be like, here's all you need. Here's where you rent the instrument. Here's whatever. And my dad actually, as it turns out, when he was very young, had also played trombone. So I was like, well, I don't know. This seems very interesting to me, but I don't know which one to pick. And I came home and was like, well, I played trombone. I mean, I have that weird long shaped case thing that's in the attic. That's my old trombone. So I was like, well, I guess I'll go back in and tell him maybe I'll try trombone. And that followed me through and got me, kind of headed in that path for the next decade through high school. And like I mentioned, I had some really great East Coast jazz players that ended up as teachers and mentors at my high school and junior high, that I really appreciate and value. I mean, there were other mentors along the way, but they just had such an energy about the way they talked about everything, from like Ellington and Basie, like old school charts, all the way up to like the new, like modern, like hyper new school, like big band charts that were being written by dudes that that you could barely make heads or tails of the charts, right? And really really experimental stuff. And the conversations we had about it, the way I heard him and so many of those other teachers speak about it, it kept me interested and it kept me digging. It taught me some really valuable lessons about, things like pocket and things that don't really, fit into a really rigid kind of fixed metronome based sense of music. And I really appreciate it. And that was, I eventually picked up guitar, when I was like 12, 13, and started playing covers, and what was surrounding me was ska music, because that was kind of, again, playing trombone, that was the crossover and entry point from, that kind of big band jazz, like, woodwind, horn based type arrangement stuff, and rock music. So that was kind of the transition into that stuff. And then eventually I started writing, I guess, what were, punk songs, but without the horns initially, or well, some with horns initially, and started, covering a lot of those charts. And after I graduated high school, I had a lot of relationships and friendships with other local musicians that played in bands, that we were doing DIY floor shows at VFW halls, renting out gymnasiums ourselves, pretending to be 18, and signing paperwork and throwing punk shows. And we actually got together just to kind of shoot the shit a little bit, and ended up writing kind of a silly parody song, actually, about how we disliked Route 9, which runs through New Jersey. And and we thought that that would be that, and clearly about 20 years later, it wasn't, and that turned out to be the band that has decidedly placed us in a music career, which is pretty crazy. So that's kind of my origin story through all of that,
Cool.
and how it ties a lot of that together. Yeah.
What was the first live show you ever saw that blew you away?
Um, well, truthfully, it was probably a lot of those like early big band tunes. It's like we're maybe even um before I started going to like huge like rock shows, or I think a friend's mom very early on when we were young took us to see like Dave Matthews Band and Ozo Motley at the now non-existent Veteran Stadium. So I remember that, like sitting like straight up nosebleeds, but the atmosphere was wild. So that was one that definitely, like, I remember the excitement and the level of that. But the real stuff that hit me was like, you know, these like wild professional local regional big bands playing some of these like standards, where they have a horn section, and you're like, they're not mic'd up and they're blowing my hair off right now, and just the power of, um, you know, a non-amplified band, and just a completely, you know, just had such an energy where I was like, oh my God, like they can do this. They don't have, it's not like, they don't need like a massive PA system, or it's like, this is incredible. And it's, even just in its stripped down form. So it was probably some of those. There was a spot, in Philadelphia called Chris's Jazz Cafe, and actually my high school band director would play there. He had a couple bands that he was leading, while we were in high school, and I think we'd go out to see them play some of those shows, and that kind of like true jazz experience, where you're sitting down like a dark club. It's not like a wild crazy audience, but it is some of the most unreal musicianship you will ever seen, and it's like you're eavesdropping on a conversation that's wildly salacious. So some of those, so I kind of ran the gamut, and then of course, like by the time I was 15, 16, I was going to things like Warped Tour, which is like these massive outdoor punk festivals, across the country, and that has a whole culture of its own that is really infectious and really, in a lot of ways counterculture or alternative, as I think a lot of teenagers do tend to gravitate towards. And I was
Yeah.
one of them. So, those were some of like I said, I had a really interesting mixed bag of those early shows and early concerts. It wasn't just like I went to one like massive show and I was hooked. It was a series of all of those playing different roles that I think shaped how I felt, and how I was just like, I there will never be a time when I'm not doing this in some way, or trying to create this kind of environment, whether it be for myself or somebody else's project. So,
So you've been at this game for a long time, a couple decades now. What do you like the best about being a professional musician? What is it that really motivates you? What do you look forward to?
I love learning. I think it's like you never run out of, and I know there's like people talk about, it's like, well, there's a finite amount of chords and progressions, like hasn't it all been written again? We are in an era where, just in the back half of my lifetime, the tools and capabilities and delivery methods and, the shrinking of the world through online collaboration is just really exponentially amplifying the possibilities of where we can go, where people can go. And I think at the heart of that, that means also the kind of interactions and reactions that you can ultimately start eliciting and pulling out from listeners, and just general music fans. And so to me, waking up every day and saying, whether I'm working on, remotely producing a track for a young band and trying to explore and help them find out where they want to go, and all of their influences and how we bake them together in a cohesive package, or stepping out onto a stage in our hometown and playing to 4 or 5,000 people, and kind of having that all inspired thing of like, we've built this is a community. This is something that you're literally looking at 5,000 people that all may be very different in lots of other ways, but share this and are sharing this moment, this hour and a half, this 2 hour experience, this whole evening. And that to me is a fact that is in no way lost on me, and is actually something that I become more humbled by and in awe of, and grateful for every day. So if I can keep chasing that, not even that feeling, but chasing a path in music that allows others to generate that, and continuing to almost in a butterfly effect way. My goal now, I like I mentioned, I mentor and have started coaching a lot of artists with their career planning, and how to market their bands a little bit more efficiently and more authentically right now in the digital realm, instead of just getting sucked into, I don't want to become a content creator and pandering to whatever audience, shows itself. I want to be able to help them share that story and help them go chase that, and then get out of the way and keep the whole thing going. So there's no shortage of ways. Literally every day, this conversation and so many of the ones that I have always seem to open another door where I'm like, wow, could really do something here, and
Yeah.
and potentially help a whole other generation of people that are going to make music. So it's no longer even just about the music that I want to make. That there's a finite amount of that, right? I only have so many days in my life, to try and make what I think are really great, great songs and great pieces of music with other people. But if I can help somebody else that's going to go make something that just blows the music scene or whatever scene they're in wide open, that's going to be awesome. So
Yep. Absolutely.
that's what keeps me going, man. That's there is no shortage of creative outlets, and like I said too, I love playing, I love writing. It is its own dopamine high in itself. But now, after a couple of decades, I kind of have found the same fulfillment when I can help somebody creatively work through, here's an album. Let's pull all of those stories, all of those emotions, all of that imagery and all of that context about it out, and let's present it and build a whole experience instead of just kind of putting the album out and hoping people listen to it. You can really expand and build whole 360 multi-dimensional experiences now with releases, and that's what I love too. That's a whole new avenue of creativity that I can sit there and do, with a different artist every day.
Right on. So if anyone out there wants to get your music, learn more about you, anything pertaining to your world online, where can they go?
Yeah, that's a simple one. Most of that and a little bit more background and context on everything that I do is just at my website, which is caseycavaliere.com. There's an E on the end of Cavalier. Still not sure why, but some things get passed down through generations. But it is silent for some reason as well, just to confuse people, I suppose. So that's where you find most of that. And I'm mostly active these days on Instagram at case_rock. I like to look at some pictures, and I think it's a really powerful vehicle, that in video. And if anybody has any questions, I am more than open to having a conversation either via DM or there's some forms, on the website that you can take a look at and see if anything interests you. I do encourage anybody to reach out about that, and or if there's a music creation collaboration lane that they're interested in exploring.
Yeah. One quick question before we get out the door here. If you could go back in time and see anybody in the history of music live, where would you go? Who would you see?
Wow. Honestly, as like I mentioned, some of those old school jazz standards, I think I would go back and see probably Count Basie Orchestra, just in a really, and I don't think, again, I'm not just saying that because this is primarily a jazz focused show, but I'm also saying that too because I'd love to see what I learn and what I take away from that. Again, I think it's about an experience, right? The intimacy of the club, the room that that band is playing in, and the way there's this intangible energy through how he played, conducted whatever, selected the musicians to play with him and curated that kind of dynamic is unreal. I think part of being a really great producer is, sometimes not just saying, okay, how do we do this, but saying, who can we pull in to make this what it can be, right? What's that extra sauce that maybe we don't have with this group right now that'll just completely take this to a different place, and knock it wide open. And I loved, he had, if you look at everybody that played in his bands, I mean, I
Oh
don't need
man.
to, your audience can probably like totally run circles around me in terms of that kind of trivia, but that is the one thing overall that I really took away in saying, like, oh my God, it feels like all roads kind of just lead back to Basie,
Yeah.
in such a cool way. So I'd love to see him play really in any iteration, because I think it would be transcendent, and really I would get so much from it.
Yeah, I would join you for sure. Casey,
Yeah.
this has been great, man. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for getting into your history and your music. So I look forward to getting this out there, and hopefully more people listen to your music, man.
Joe, well, I appreciate it. Yes, very kind. I love the show. Love what you're doing. Also, I saw somewhere, I think you're like over the 800 episode mark, which just, let me say, in terms of like being a prolific creator, whether it be of interviews or bringing out people's stories, is an incredible milestone. Anybody that can do something for that long and build upon it, you're doing an awesome thing, man. So I commend you on that. Congrats.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I love it, man. It's so good to get the story and to get out there and to give it to the people. So thank you, man. And same to you. Wonderful work. Thank you for opening up, and best of luck with everything as we move forward.
I appreciate that, Joe. Have a good one.
Cool. Take care.